Anna, welcome to the Communication Queen podcast. I think where I want to dive in is the parallel, like you as a divorce attorney, like help people navigate through such a challenging time. And 50% of marriages end up going through it. But you've also experienced a business divorce. And I think that that's like, as someone who also has had gone through a business divorce, like I think that this is a really powerful topic for how do we set ourselves up for success in the foundation of a partnership? Because I think in the foundation, it's just like with dating. Anything like there's so much possibility. And so, what are the things that we need to look out for? What are the things that we want to be aware of? What are the things that also contractually we want to have that help us stay secure in our businesses? So we're cool on the exit process.
Great question and a great way to start this conversation. So, tying it to dating, absolutely, because business relationships are very similar to lifelong partnerships. You are going to spend so much time and energy with this person or people. And so you want to make sure that you're on the same wavelength as far as what do we want from this business? Are we really trying to build? And how are we trying to build it? What will be our roles within this business, right? Sometimes you have people who are contributing capital. Sometimes you have people who are contributing ideas or sweat equity. And if that's what you're doing, really have these conversations at the front end and document what exactly are you each contributing in what way? How will your processes work throughout the life of your business? And don't skim over what happens if one or more of you want out and what would happen. Like, what's the trigger? If one of you says, I want out, what happens? Because that's such an important piece. And that can then mean that you either have an amicable business divorce, which is what happened in my own situation. So I was one of the founding partners and I was a managing partner of the law firm for 12 years. And then COVID hit, and we all had that moment where we kind of went, what is my life? What do I want it to look like? Where are we going next? And my former partner and I realized that where we were going were two different places, but we wanted to remain friends. We wanted to respect the relationship that we had built over the last 12 years. And we really didn't want to spend years litigating a business divorce because that happens. Similar to divorces and personal lives, you can spend years in court litigating over these issues. And we don't want to spend energy and time and money litigating this. And then two additional really important points. Make sure that you have a clear understanding of how the ins and outs of the business will work and communicate throughout. So how will the day-to-day operations work and how will you handle money? Because that's important, and have
Mm,
transparency.
yeah, the money piece is a huge one because shame loves secrets. I see so many ties in between, what you do as a divorce attorney and then your story as far as how you went through your amicable business divorce. And I know you help people go through very amicable and conscious, personal divorces, marital divorces.
I do
So
now.
you do now. So when you're like, how often do you share your story with your clients? Because I know you haven't actually gone through a divorce, like a personal one, but a business divorce, it can be very emotional, just like a personal divorce can be.
It comes up from time to time, just as far as my professional background. So I've been practicing as a divorce attorney for 18 plus years. Majority of that time, I was a litigator. And then since 2008, I became trained as a mediator and then collaborative divorce attorney. And that was part of my practice, but I was still litigating. And then again, around COVID, one of those aha moments for me was I really want to focus on collaborative divorce and mediation. That's where my passion is. That's where I really do some of my best work. I see myself really helping people and helping their families have better outcomes, build better futures. And that was a big pivot moment for me. I didn't want to litigate anymore. I didn't see myself there. I didn't see myself really bringing value and helping my clients build brighter futures. And so if it comes up, I will freely talk about it, but that's not the focus. The focus is more on talking to them about where they are and what they need. And if you ask my clients, who is Anna and why did you choose her? It's more about because she's empathic and compassionate and she understands what we're looking for and she will help us build that future. But at the same time, she's a strong advocate and she understands the law piece and can talk about it and can help us structure an agreement that works for us without sacrificing, helping us really figure out what is important and what we need.
Yeah,
So
I think
it's
that
it's kind of a good mix of the litigator background, but the mediator and the collaborative piece as well.
yeah, and that collaborative piece especially, um, I can only imagine. I didn't use a lawyer when I went through my divorce when I pulled a Brittany when I was 22.
Yeah,
It was a very simple piece of paper that just but that experience of all of the emotions that go into it, and I know having gone through, like, I would have to say my business divorce was, and that
mhm.
exit was a lot more emotional and challenging than even my personal one, simply because of 2 years of blood, sweat, equity, like, poured into a company and looking to take this thing. It's kind of like arguing over a child. Like
It is.
you're battling for custody of the business. And so how do you do that in an amicable way to where heightened emotions doesn't have to blow up and end up in court and litigation?
So focused in on that exact element. So with collaborative, we acknowledge that there are so many emotions tied to if there are kids to kids, but also to money in general and to all of these dreams and plans and thoughts and past and the time we put into a relationship, right? Whether it's a marriage or a business. And so dealing with all of those emotions really, really makes a difference in a collaborative divorce because we don't pretend they don't exist. We don't shove them in a closet and just kind of pretend that it's just a business deal that we're
Mhm.
inking and try to move on, which in many instances, that's what a litigated divorce turns into because the courts are really not equipped to handle people's emotions. And we could talk about why they're there to really deal with situations where there are, a lot of cases coming their way. They have to deal with situations where the folks can't agree for whatever reasons and they're doing the best they can. I get why. And there are instances where the courts and the judges are needed. But in the collaborative process, the people who are choosing those types of approaches in those cases are really looking at it from the perspective of we get it that there are emotions, help us process those emotions so they don't sneak up on us, so that we can have this conversation and really figure out what works on the parenting piece or on the financial piece, and then avoid having these, issues come up now and in the future. And by the way, there are states where you can use collaborative process for business divorces, for estate planning issues, probate issues, so that the process itself isn't necessarily just tied to divorce. The idea is let's figure this out. Let's talk about it. Let's talk about what's important. Sometimes we talk about issues or concepts that maybe the statute wouldn't necessarily recognize, but it's important to one of the parties, right? So let's hear your concern or the issue that really is bothering you about what happened in the life of the marriage or maybe in the business. And let's talk about it. Let's at least acknowledge that it happened because sometimes the person who wants to talk about it isn't necessarily always even asking for a financial compensation. We just want to be heard. This happened. Really bothered me that you did X, Y, and Z or did not do X, Y, and Z.
Mhm. And I've seen that with customer challenges as well, like when there's a customer dispute or when a customer is upset. Like, for the most part, they just wanna be heard. Whether it's a customer or a business partner or your romantic partner, like, or your former romantic partner, it's like people just wanna have a voice to their experience not necessarily hoping that you'll provide the like most epic of glorious solutions, but they just want to be heard.
Yeah.
And when you can come from that agreement frame, especially in communication, where it's like, you're right, we messed up. You're right. I didn't communicate those needs specifically. You're right. That wasn't laid out in our initial terms. And you are absolutely right. And I think that that takes a lot of like being humility to be able to set your ego aside and hear somebody out who disagrees with you or who just wants to state their case. So what has this process of mediation and collaborative divorce taught you about communication?
So a lot. And you said something really important. You said someone just wants to state their case. And one of the key takeaways for me from learning about mediation and collaborative process, because you first learn to become a mediator and then you take additional training to become collaborative practitioner, was to, for example, listen to understand rather than listen to respond.
Mm, that,
And
I mean, that's that in and of itself. Listen to understand rather than listening to respond. That can be a takeaway for every podcaster, every podcast guest, every person who's involved with any sort of interpersonal communication, which is every person on this planet.
yeah, yeah. The other tip is listening and then reframing what you heard as a way to, one, making sure that you understood correctly, as well as validating what the person was saying.
Can you give an example of that?
Sure. So, for example, when you said listening to state your case, and I said listening to understand rather than listening to respond, that was both a key takeaway and reframing what you were saying and validating what you were saying.
Yeah, it's a beautiful way that you did it in communication of just being able to have it said in a different way because sometimes we don't hear it the first time. I always think of a breakthrough like kind of like a safe. And depending upon what you're trying to break through to, especially if somebody has a lot of like negative emotions built up again, like so they've got some walls, you're gonna have to turn that safe dial a few times to be able to unlock it. And sometimes that just means saying things in a different way, but saying the same thing.
You are 100% correct. So, part of the beauty of collaborative process is we do a lot of training with mental health professionals and financial neutrals because those are other collaborative practitioners who work with us on our teams. And through that, I have learned that when you are flooded with emotions, you don't hear, or you hear, but you don't process, you don't retain the information. So, yes, you will need to hear the same thing multiple times.
And I've heard that from politicians as well, because they're constantly communicating to an emotionalized crowd, whether it's a crowd that's
Mhm.
for them or a crowd that's against them. And the ability to get through those emotions, sometimes that's it's tough, especially in this divisive world at
Yes,
this moment.
yes, absolutely. Absolutely. It's something about how your brain is built, and I'm not a mental health professional or a biologist, but I think it has something to do with your amygdala.
The amygdala gets hijacked and goes on overdrive. And basically, you can't hear anything except for like safety and survival, which, especially when you're dealing with heightened emotions, sometimes our safety and our survival is attached to an identity or an emotion, a familiar emotion that we're used to experiencing. Like many people can be familiar or used to experiencing, like anger or sadness or blame. And that,
Yes.
in order to, you know, have a communicate around that, you also have to recognize that amygdala getting hijacked. And when fear takes over and the fear of like, oh my gosh, they're going to take everything away from me, which believe me, when I was going through business divorce, I thought that I felt that every day it was so stressful. And the fears of, my reputation and my name and all that and these things that were being said. And I was so grateful to have my husband and my lawyer to be able to walk me through and let me know like, hey, they they can't say anything because there's a clause called the libel clause. You won't impugn somebody else's character publicly or anything like that. So it's understanding those pieces. And I tell people when they're going on podcasts, like to know if you've gone through a divorce or a business divorce, make sure you know what your clauses are when you're going on and speaking about somebody else. So I'd love to know from your perspective, especially as a lawyer, how can somebody who's going on podcasts and sharing about their experience of their divorce do so in a way that doesn't impugn the other person's character, even if there was something such as like domestic violence or trauma involved with that marriage, so that their former partner can't come after them in any way?
That's such a great question. And let's back up a little bit. So, first of all, in general, understand any legal documents, right? Whether it's a business divorce or a personal divorce, just understand your documents before you sign them as you're negotiating. I am such a huge proponent of have multiple conversations, understand the details, understand what it says. If you think it says something different, really clarify that because it was heartbreaking to me when I was still litigating and I would get these consultations from clients who were not my clients during their divorces, would come back and would not know what was in their divorce agreements. And I would walk them through paragraph by paragraph and explain. And they would be breaking down in my office saying, I had no idea this is what it said or this is what I agreed to, but they did. And sometimes you can't undo a legal judgment depending on what was in there and what had happened and how much time had passed. And depending on the law in your state, there are things you can't undo. You can't
Can you give
undo.
an yeah,
Sure,
of one that you can't
sure.
undo?
In Illinois, if you waive maintenance, spousal support alimony, you can't come back and say, I didn't mean it. Oopsie, I didn't understand. I need this spousal support. I need this alimony. It's done. Unless you can somehow allege fraud or that there was no disclosure of financial information, and that's a difficult thing to prove. That's done.
That's so
Yeah, and it's really really important that you understand all the elements. And I'm a huge proponent of informed consent, of understanding all of the elements. But coming back to, if you're speaking publicly about your divorce, whether that's personal or business, this piece is gonna apply more to the personal divorce. If you have kids, and again, when you're working with me, you're my client, but really your client, my biggest client are gonna be your kids. Because I'm gonna tell you, this is how the fallout from this divorce is gonna impact your kids. So I'm gonna tell you, if you choose to speak publicly, first think about how would this impact your children if they hear this? Regardless of what the divorce agreement says, regardless of your relationship with your ex, if your kids hear this, do you want them to hear this? So kind of view this through that lens. Now on to your original question. Again, lawyer brain. I always view anything via the lens of if I have to go back to court in the future, if I release this information publicly, not just am I concerned about being accused of libel or slander, whether that's in print or video, does it potentially make my life more difficult if I'm trying to go back and either get a payment of something that's owed or get a modification on a child support or a property settlement or a maintenance? So I would view any sort of public conversation via that lens. How would this impact my future goals related to this divorce? I would also think about, is what I'm saying truthful? Because that's a defense, right? Against accusation of libel and slander. Is it truthful? I would think about, are there any non-disclosure provisions in my settlement agreement? I would think about what are the statutes in my state. So maybe have that conversation with your attorney as you're signing these agreements and really understand what are the limitations here. And it's not just your divorce agreement. If you signed a prenup, there might be language in there that talked about we will not disclose certain information, whether that's the assets or the values of assets or anything related to our marriage or divorce. So it's not necessarily just your divorce decree. Was there a prenup or a postnup for that matter? So
Mm.
think of it all.
I think that that's something because especially with, like, celebrities and 'cause there are certain things that you cannot say, and because they have
Hmm.
some, like, ironclad prenups and postnups where and not everything is the Johnny Depp Amber Heard trial.
Right.
And
Right.
being able to understand the contracts that you're signing, especially, I think I see a lot of women who come out of divorces and they want to share their story, especially if it involved, something harrowing like
Hmm.
escaping domestic violence or domestic abuse or something like that. But I always caution, I'm just like, "Well, talk it over with your lawyer, look at what your actual documents are to see what you are capable of saying. Because I know for me, I was scared for years to talk about my business buyout and that
Hmm.
experience. And it was because I couldn't say anything libelous. Now, I don't plan to, but like the experience of how do I frame something to share from my personal experience and my learnings that allowed me to become who I am today from that experience and like what I learned and gathered from that. And so for me, I make the joke that the lawyers don't always send you the nicest emails when they're not on your side. And oh,
No, they don't.
no, they
No, they
don't.
don't.
Being able to navigate it with humor and grace and that helped me because I did feel the need to share my story, but not I never want to impugn my former business partner's character. Like he's an awesome man. We had a great 2 years together, but like that experience was really challenging for me.
Yeah,
And, that any sort of divorce experience, a business buyout experience, anything like that, or an exit, it can be very challenging in the emotion.
absolutely.
And
Absolutely.
what are some best practices for being able to communicate it? So you've checked your contract, you see that what you're capable of. How can you frame your story? Because I'd love to hear this from a lawyer's perspective, so that it doesn't impugn the other person's character, but you're able to share your side in a way that is stating facts, stating experiences, and still able to guide the story so that you see, people can come out on the other end.
I think if you focus on facts, I think if you talk about the impact on you, if you talk about your growth, your journey post that experience, post divorce, and especially if you have a positive ending, I think you would be okay. Again, depending on the specifics of your agreement and the state you're in, right? I have to give that caveat because different states, different laws. But I think if you stick with those parameters, you should be okay.
Yeah, for the most part. And that was something that I definitely put into my book. I was like, disclaimer, not a lawyer, but here's like
Right.
legal jargon that you don't want to be using or that can have some consequences, especially when I have, people who are coming on as naturopaths or functional medicine doctors or things like that. Certain language, like there's language that you can use and that you can't use unless you're an allopathic medical practitioner. And
Absolutely.
being aware of the language that you're using now, as somebody who does law for a living, like what are some ways of languaging your experience? Like, can you give an example that could possibly get someone in trouble versus one that can actually share their story, but without impugning somebody else's character?
So if you started talking about specific incidents and going into allegations as far as legal charges, even though maybe there were no legal charges actually filed against someone, but you're saying that person committed X, Y, and Z, right? And you didn't call police and
Hmm.
there were no actual charges filed, that person might then be saying, wait a minute, you didn't call police. There were no charges filed. I was never charged with anything. There were no criminal cases, yet you're out there publicly accusing me of X, Y, and Z.
Hmm.
That could get you into trouble.
Hmm. So documentation is a huge piece because especially when we have clients that have some sort of a trauma story, that having
Yeah.
some past documentation that is like with the courts, with the police that so that it's there is very helpful and supportive.
Yes, but domestic violence and in general relationships where there is variety of domestic violence, right? Because now we're
Mm.
getting into a realm where it's not always physical. There can be emotional, there can be financial control, and it runs the gamut. So it's not always a clear cut, yes, there was physical violence, right? It could be arranged. Victims of domestic violence don't always report.
Mm.
So there might not be documents. Or if there are documents, it might not be that the victim of domestic violence is listed as the victim in the reports, right? A lot of things happen. And so, again, when you start talking about these things, you really want to make sure that you are talking in a way that will not then cause you further issues, right? You don't want
Yeah.
to then be dragged back into court and have to relive that cycle. And what I was trying to get to is that sometimes in a domestic violence cycle, the dynamic becomes that sometimes the victim snaps, right? And they react, but then the charges are filed against the original victim. And so, yes, there might be a report, but it's against the original victim.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah. Domestic violence is it's such a messy realm. And having had friends and clients and colleagues who have gone through that experience, it is a very, very challenging system to navigate with full evidentiary proof and documentation.
It is the best advice I can give anyone who's listening who is caught in the cycle of domestic violence is if you can reach out to advocates, reach out to nonprofits that work with victims of domestic violence. They often offer counseling. They often offer services to help you slowly get out of that cycle, even if right now you feel trapped and you feel like you can't get out. And so, in a safe way, if you can, if you're ready for that step, contact them, right? What we're talking about here now might seem like impossible dream for you, but if you are safely able to take that first step, and can contact those nonprofits that offer those services, we hope that you're able to do that and do that safely.
Yeah, and we'll leave some links and numbers down below if anyone who is listening to this is currently going through that level of situation or has gone through that situation and is looking for some counseling or advice as you want to go out there and have this be a part of your story. You recognize that this is a part of your story, but you're still not sure as to how to disclose it in a way that also keeps you safe. And the main thing is your safety.
Yes, absolutely.
So Anna, I know we got deep fast.
We did.
I
We
want to
did.
pivot gears because I know, like, one of the things that I just love about you is that, I mean, you're such a talented lawyer. You have your second successful law practice. Like, you are doing amazing things for helping couples consciously uncouple in a way that creates collaborative divorce so that like people aren't at each other's throats and that kids feel very supported. But you're also a children's book author. You're
I
also multi-passionate, and I love that about I love discovering the secrets and passions of people that, like, make them weird and unique and different and fun because that's the thing that podcasts love to see is they're like, "Wait, you're what?" And I love a good plot twist. So tell us about your children's book.
pivoting away from being a litigator, right? Freed up some of my time, which made room for creativity. So I am an Amazon bestselling author for an adult's book already and working on other books, both for adults and for children. So there is a series of kids' books in the works, and it will be coming out in early 2025. So I hope that you will stay tuned and check out my website and Communications Queen's links for that additional information. But yeah, kids' books, and they were inspired by my work with my clients and conversations we often have about their children, as well as my own child.
Are they like can you give us a hint or like a sneak peek as to like what they're about? Like, are they in any way correlated to like amicable divorces or is it completely something that's different?
There's a connection there. There's a
Okay.
connection there.
So
There is
written
definitely a connection there.
Yeah, so written for kids whose parents are currently splitting.
Yes.
Oh, I love that, and I think that that's so necessary for I mean, A, that ties in so beautifully with what you do. It also ties in with the fact that you're a mom and, like, no parent when they're married, like, no person getting married is thinking, "Oh, this is gonna end in divorce." I
Right. You don't. And it's difficult to have these conversations with your children. And I often walk my clients through how do you have these conversations? And so I had that aha moment. Well, if I keep having these conversations over and over and over again, why
might be
don't we
beneficial.
just create something?
Yeah. Yeah, I love that, and then you have a repeatable tool that you can give to your clients and to their kids who are navigating the challenges of going through, their parents divorcing, and I love that everything is so
Thank you.
holistic with you, but it's just like that, especially for podcasters, because one of the things that I tell all of our clients is I'm like, "What is that, like, plot twist different thing?" And I can't tell you, having gone on so many podcasts now, and it's like, professional credential, TED speaker, Amazon bestselling author, and all this, and then they're like, "Fart book?"
I love that about you. I think it's awesome.
It definitely but that also keeps it memorable too. It's
Yeah.
like when you can make somebody laugh or make somebody go like, "Wait, what?" Like that makes you memorable, and I love that you have a children's book series that is gonna support kids that also ties into what you do as a mediator and just as an attorney. And I just think you're doing such amazing work in the world, Anna. Thank you so much for coming on the Communication Queen podcast. Where can we find you? Ideally, we don't need to work with you, but if someone is going through a divorce or knows somebody who's going through a divorce and they want to get some good books for their kids to be able to support them, how do we get in contact?
Well, and I will be the first person to tell you, I hope you don't need me. And I truly mean that. But if someone in your circle does, please send them my way. I will give you my website and then hopefully we can share my social media handles via the Communication Queens podcast. So that way I'm not talking for 2 minutes about all
Yeah.
of that. So my website is www.annaklaw.com. So that's ANNAK law.com. We kept it simple.
Easy, easy. Yeah, because your last name is a doozy for sure.
It is. I'm stubborn. I kept it that way, even
I
after
love
I
it.
got married.
Good for you. Good for you. Changing your name is like it's a beast in and of itself. So I told my
Yeah.
husband never again.
Yes. And I have to admit that I met my husband later in life. So at that point, I've established a professional reputation. So as a business
Hmm.
owner, I was not going to go through that process of
Yep.
changing it.
Yep. I totally feel you on that one. Having gone through it myself once, I'm like, nope, never again. I am
Yeah.
Spencer for life. Anna, it has been amazing having you on. I hope that for all of our listeners, you take her advice to heart. Look over your contracts, y'all. Like, read your contracts, both business and personal. Know what you got yourself into. If you don't like what you got yourself into, go find a great lawyer like Anna, and maybe there's some way to figure something out. But like Anna said, some things vary state from state. So make sure you always, 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 as a business owner, read your contracts word for word. Know what you're signing, know what you're consenting to. And if you are in a situation where of domestic abuse or you have been and you want to start sharing your story but you're not quite sure, definitely get the help that you need in the support of finding the nonprofits. We will link to several of them below to support you in either getting out or in getting the counseling you need to know how to make sure that this person doesn't come back after you so that you stay safe. And if you are looking for getting some amazing children's books to support all the kids who are going through the unfortunate process of seeing their parents separate, and get Anna's books so that you can give them to them with love and let them know that even in the challenging time, they are super supported. As always, my fellow communication queens, let your voice be heard. Until next time. Thank you so much for listening. If you love this episode, subscribe, leave us a review, and share it with your friends. For more tips on guest podcasting, storytelling, and communication strategies, follow us on social media at Communication Queens Agency and visit us at communicationqueens.com. I look forward to seeing you in the next episode. And in the meantime, remember, your story has the power to save one life. Let your story and your voice be heard.